Have you ever agreed to spend money you didn't really want to spend and felt a strange tension in your chest the moment you said yes? Not panic, not regret, just this quiet feeling that something shifted. You tell yourself it's fine, it's just dinner, just a trip, just a gift, just helping out. And none of those things feel irresponsible on their own. But over time, the yeses start to pile up. And somehow, even though nothing bad happened, your finances feel heavier than they should. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And it's not because you're bad with money. My name is Alex. I spend a lot of time thinking about how small social decisions quietly shape our financial lives, long before we ever notice the consequences. This topic feels invisible because saying yes is usually framed as kindness, responsibility, or being a good person. We rarely talk about the quiet pressure it creates over time. If you find yourself thinking about money in the slower, more reflective way, you might want to subscribe. And with that in mind, let's talk about the money pressure that comes from saying yes. Most people think financial stress comes from obvious things: debt, low income, bad spending habits, and those things matter, but they're not the full picture. A huge amount of money pressure doesn't come from reckless decisions. It comes from reasonable ones. From choices that feel socially correct, emotionally safe, and morally acceptable. We're taught that saying yes is a good trait. Yes means you're supportive. Yes means you're flexible. Yes means you're not difficult. And because of that, we rarely question what those yeses cost us. Not just financially, but emotionally. Saying yes feels safe because it avoids friction. It avoids awkwardness. It avoids disappointing someone. It avoids the uncomfortable pause where you have to explain yourself. Saying no, even politely, carries emotional risk. It creates uncertainty. It invites judgment, even if no one says anything out loud. So most of us default to yes, not because we want to spend the money, but because we want to preserve harmony. And over time, that trade-off becomes expensive. Money pressure is rarely just about money. It's about relationships. It shows up with friends when plans escalate quietly. It shows up with family when expectations aren't spoken clearly. It shows up at work when lifestyle norms set a baseline you didn't choose. And because these pressures come from people we care about, we treat them differently than bills. A bill feels external. A person feels personal. So we stretch ourselves a little more. We absorb the cost internally. We tell ourselves it's temporary. And sometimes it is. But often it becomes a pattern. Think about how many spending decisions start with, do you want to? Dinner out, weekend plans, group trips, weddings, celebrations. None of these are wrong. In fact, many of them are meaningful. But here's the subtle part. You rarely get asked about your financial context. You're asked about your availability. So you answer socially, not financially. You don't say yes because you ran the numbers. You say yes because it feels easier than explaining why not. And that's how money pressure sneaks in without asking permission. One of the most dangerous parts of social spending is escalation. It rarely jumps from zero to expensive. It moves slowly. A casual hangout becomes a regular habit. A simple meal becomes an expectation. A modest plan becomes the normal version. And once something becomes normal, opting out feels like a statement. Not participating doesn't feel neutral. It feels like you're withdrawing. So you keep saying yes, even as the cost rises. Not because you're careless, but because the social cost of saying no feels higher than the financial cost of saying yes. At least in the moment. Family adds another layer. With family, spending is rarely framed as a choice. It's framed as responsibility. Helping out, contributing, doing your part. And again, none of this is inherently bad. The problem starts when responsibility becomes assumed rather than discussed. When expectations exist, but boundaries don't. You don't want to look selfish. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You don't want to create tension. So you say yes quietly. and carry the weight alone. The reason this kind of pressure is so hard to manage is because it doesn't trigger alarm. You're not overspending wildly. You're not making obviously bad decisions. You're just accommodating. And accommodation feels virtuous. So when stress builds, you don't immediately connect it to those yeses. You assume the problem must be something else. Your income, the economy, your discipline. But often, the real issue is that your financial life is absorbing too many unspoken obligations. There's a psychological reason this happens. Humans are wired to avoid social rejection. It's deeply uncomfortable to feel out of sync with the group. So we prioritize belonging, often without realizing it. Money becomes a tool for maintaining alignment. We spend not to gain something, but to avoid standing out. And when spending is used defensively, it becomes draining. Over time, yes stops being a decision. It becomes a reflex. You don't pause anymore. You don't check in with yourself. You just go along. That's when pressure compounds. Because reflexive spending removes intention. And without intention, money drifts. Here's the part most people don't talk about. Constantly saying yes doesn't just affect your bank account. It affects your internal state. You feel stretched. You feel quietly resentful, even if you don't want to admit it. You feel tired in a way rest doesn't fix. Not because people are doing something wrong, but because you're ignoring your own limits. The turning point usually comes quietly. It's not a fight. It's not a financial crisis. It's a moment of realization. You notice that your stress isn't coming from lack of money. It's coming from lack of choice. You're spending reactively, not intentionally. And once you see that, the problem reframes itself. This isn't about becoming less generous. It's about becoming more honest. Saying no isn't rejection. It's information. It clarifies your boundaries. It reveals what's optional and what's expected. It shows you which relationships can handle honesty. Most of the time, the consequences we fear don't actually happen. People adapt. Plans adjust. Life continues. And the relief you feel internally is often immediate. There's a difference between being kind and erasing yourself. Kindness considers both sides. Self-erasure prioritizes harmony at any cost. When money is involved, that cost accumulates quietly, and eventually it shows up as anxiety, guilt, or frustration you can't quite explain. This doesn't mean you stop saying yes. It means you slow it down. You give yourself permission to pause before agreeing. You separate social comfort from financial reality. You allow a little silence instead of immediate compliance. You don't owe detailed explanations. You don't need dramatic boundaries. Often, a simple, calm response is enough. And each time you choose intentionally, pressure loosens slightly. At first, saying no feels awkward. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. You're changing a pattern. And patterns resist change. But discomfort doesn't mean damage. It often means adjustment. When you stop defaulting to yes, something shifts. You feel more grounded, more present, less reactive. Money stops feeling like something that leaks away through obligation. It starts to feel aligned with your values again. Most people don't feel financial pressure because they're irresponsible. They feel it because they're considerate, because they want to belong, because they don't want to disappoint, because they've learned to prioritize peace in the moment. But long-term peace comes from alignment, not avoidance. You don't need to say no to everything. You just need to stop saying yes automatically. Progress doesn't come from cutting people off. It comes from including yourself in the equation. And when you do that, quietly and consistently, money starts to feel lighter. Not because you have more of it, but because it finally reflects your choices, not just your obligations. And that's a change worth making.